Welcome to this video on the power of default arguments. If you're a C# developer, you know that short-circuiting and conditionals are important programming constructs that allow you to execute certain code paths based on certain conditions. But did you know that default arguments can often be a better choice for improving the readability and maintainability of your code? In this video, we'll be exploring the benefits of using default arguments instead of short-circuiting or conditionals, and we'll see how they can help to simplify your code and make it easier to understand. By the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of how default arguments work, and you'll be able to use them in your own C# projects to improve the quality of your code. So let's dive in and see how default arguments can help us write better code. Using default arguments instead of short-circuiting or conditionals is a principle that aims to improve the readability and maintainability of your code. Short-circuiting and conditionals are programming constructs that allow you to execute certain code paths based on certain conditions. For example, you might use an if statement to check whether a certain condition is true, and then execute a different block of code depending on the result of the condition. While short-circuiting and conditionals can be useful in certain situations, they can also make your code more difficult to read and understand, especially if there are multiple layers of nested conditionals or if the conditionals are complex. Default arguments, on the other hand, allow you to specify a default value for a function parameter that will be used if no value is passed to the function when it is called. This can help to simplify your code and make it more readable, as you can avoid the need for conditionals or short-circuiting by specifying default values for function parameters. Here is a bad example of how conditionals are used to set a default text to variables. In this example, the sendEmail function has three parameters: recipient, subject, and message. The subject and message parameters have null as default values, which means that they are optional when the function is called. If no value is provided for subject or message, the default value will be used. The following conditions check if subject and message are null or empty, and if this condition is true, a new value is set to them. Instead of using conditionals or short-circuiting, you can use default arguments to specify default values for function parameters and simplify your code. This can help to improve the readability and maintainability of your code and make it easier to understand and work with. Here is an example of how you might use default arguments in C# to avoid short-circuiting and conditionals. In this revised version of the sendEmail function, the subject and message parameters have default values of no subject and no message, respectively. This means that if no value is provided for subject or message when the function is called, the default values will be used instead. This allows you to avoid the need for conditionals or short-circuiting in the function, which can make it easier to read and understand. Using default arguments in this way can help to simplify your code and make it more readable, as you can specify default values for function parameters and avoid the need for conditionals or short-circuiting. This can improve the maintainability of your code and make it easier to work with. Using default arguments can improve the readability and maintainability of your code by allowing you to specify default values for function parameters and avoid the need for conditionals or short-circuiting. This can make your code easier to understand and work with. In C#, you can use default arguments by specifying a default value for a function parameter. If no value is provided for the parameter when the function is called, the default value will be used instead. It is generally best to avoid using short-circuiting or conditionals in your code, as they can make it more difficult to read and understand.